right, get started. Okay, hi everybody. Let me see what the timing is. I'm going to try to stick to a half hour. For a long time, I was paid by the word by the magazine. So you're going to be here at midnight begging for Advil and Gatorade. All you were at the top of school earlier. So I'm Brian. For people who are actually watching online, my name is Brian Freedman. I am a wine, spirits, travel, and writer. I'm based outside of Philadelphia. You can find me online pretty easily.
We lost a couple.
Used to host beverage pairing segments on the CNN Airport Network, and some restaurants.
Yeah.
Wine list.
Stage. I think it's gonna stay in there.
On the front line, we have one producer in our portfolio. Again, we're going to be expanding, and we're hoping to expand, but the producer that we are bringing in, we're going to be tasting the rosé today. We're passionate about it. Incredible job.
You notice you should bring the volume up. You can't hear
Because I can tell.
But today, I wanted to talk about rosé, because I think rosé as a category is sort of easy to paint with an awfully broad brush, right? Rosé all day. I love me good rosé sometimes, 1,000 degrees in suburban Philadelphia. But the category itself has
Voiceover on the virtual line.
a lot more range.
This voiceover name, do I have to mute this? No, you can't mute this. This is the host.
You heard a voice.
I'm hearing voice over on virtual line.
The world of rosé,
Someone else
using
on the
three specific ones
Maybe
as the
that's
lens through which to look at. Okay, I will say,
I'm recording.
even though this is only like a half hour, you don't want me talking at you for a half hour. My family has had to deal with that since March of 2020.
I'm the host, I have to have it open up.
So if you have questions, if you have comments, I would love to hear from you. Okay? The three rosés that we're tasting, turn off my ringer. The three rosés that we're tasting today, we're working our way north to south. So we're starting off with the Charles and Charles. And that's from Washington State. The Pacific Northwest is one of the most exciting parts of the American wine world these days. Talk a little bit about why. Kind of crazy weather there right now, right? Then we're going to be working our way southeast, a couple of miles to Provence, to southern France. And then from there, we're going to be working our way a couple more miles south to South Africa. Okay? But there are certain things that are tying all these wines together, right? So let's talk about this wine that's in our glass here. This is the Charles and Charles Rosé. Trinchero was kind enough to work with us and provide this today. They sponsored this rosé and the next one actually. So thank you, Trinchero. And this is actually a blend of 77% Syrah and the rest is Grenache, Mourvedre, Cab Sauvignon, and Grapefruit Coumasse, which you rarely see outside of southern France. So what do we notice first about the color here? Aside from the fact that it sort of matches our jackets here, right? You planned this. I love it. It's like we're wearing a concert t-shirt for the concert. I'm taking the kids to Disney World with my wife in a couple of weeks. I'm totally going to be wearing like a Disney dad
Can you see the color?
That's why you take it. It costs me $1 million. I have a right to wear the t-shirt. What do we notice about the color here? Right, like rosé comes in a range of color, right? Much lighter color. Good, absolutely. Here's what happens when you answer a question. You get more wine. For those of you who are virtual, I'm sorry, but you won't be hungover, so there's the bonus. Okay, good. So yeah, I mean, this is a much lighter color. Rosé runs the gamut from this very pale color, terms often used like onion skin, light rose water, all the way up to the color of my jacket. Right, you can get some really deep, dark, rich, extracted rosés as well. So just like red wine, rosé gets its color from the skins, right? So if you were to pick the vast majority of red grape varieties, if you were to pick a ripe berry off the vine, gently squeeze it, that juice would be clear. There's a couple of varieties out there where there's even a color, but the juice is clear in the vast majority. The color comes from macerating the juice and the skins. So the longer the juice sits in contact with the skins, the more color, the more tannin, the more of those other compounds, right? You're gonna pull out. And it's not just the amount of time that the juice sits with the skins, it's also how thick are those skins. Shiraz, the same grape, has much thicker skin than Pinot Noir, darker wine, right? Also, you're going to extract it more aggressively. There's all kinds of techniques for extracting color from red grapes. There's something called pumping over, where in a big tank, right, they'll have like a hose on the bottom, and they will have essentially a motor, right, sort of pumping liquid, the juice, over top and splashing down with this thick half of skins that floats to the top.
So you turn it to the top.
And that stirs it up.
I'm almost at the top. I'm almost at the very top.
There's another technique called punching down. Punching down is why you hire unpaid interns in a winery. Punching down is a terrible job. That means that someone is standing up there. Sometimes they're mechanized, but when an intern does it, and they will do it. So it's like an orb, right? But instead of the orb part, right? The obviously that's blade. Thank you. The blade. Instead of that being parallel to the handle, it's perpendicular. They'll sit there and by hand, they'll punch down that cap of skins.
Put it all the way up.
Really hard.
Oh, we can hear it.
Really messy. You can be hung over without ever having the benefit of your plus, because you're breathing in carbon dioxide, you're breathing in a little bit of alcohol, swallow your right? It's more gentle. So with rosé, this, like I said, there's a good bit of Syrah in this, over 3 points. So why is it so light? Because they limited the amount of time that the juice really can't monitor. Right? Oftentimes it could be 6 hours, 8 hours, 10 hours, whatever it might be.
But yeah, what's
Okay?
that?
So what's interesting here is we're going to get the flavor and aroma characteristics that are sort of reminiscent
So it's just
of the Syrah and the Cab, but not all that other textural stuff, and not all that density and richness that we expect from the red manifestation. So can we give this a good swirl and smell? By the way, I love the fact that these glasses do have these ridges on them, right? Believe it or not, and I don't know whether this was on purpose or just an aesthetic choice, but those ridges, when we swirl them, that's actually oxygenating this a little. So it works to our advantage. Give it a smell. Boy, that doesn't smell like Australian Shiraz, does it? No. Strange Shiraz, right? Blackberries, brambleberries, spice. This has none of that. What do we smell?
Raspberry. More wine for you. Absolutely, raspberry. Everyone agree there? There's definitely like a red berry character. More red berry than black berries. Right? Good. Maybe a little cherry in here.
Strawberry.
Yeah, strawberry for sure. There you go. More for you. All right, good. So let's give it a taste. Here's my question for you. Okay? My question for you is this. Does it taste the way you expected it to based on the aroma? Okay, here we go. Consistent or not consistent? Not? How's it not? Yeah, a lot of minerality, by the way, minerality, that's one of those wine words that, yeah, exactly. Rocks, or for me, like minerality, the smell of the sidewalk after it rains? That's minerality. Or when the teacher in elementary school would wipe down the chalkboard with the wet sponge or clap the erasers. I just looked like a seal, but you know what I mean, right? That to me is minerality. Good. How is it different for you? Yeah. Yeah, much more citric than the nose implied, right? That mouthwatering character is really surprising, especially given the nature of these grapes as we know them normally. So why is that? So if red wine gets its structure from tannin, right? And tannin is that compound in red wine that makes our cheeks feel like they were just rubbed with cotton, right? And our teeth feel a little bit scratchy, right? That's tannin. That's what makes red wine, very tannic red wines, pair so well with fat and protein, like steak, for example, right? Rosé is going to be getting its structure from acidity, just like white wine will. So if we have a rosé that does not have enough acidity, it'll sort of fall apart on the palate. And it's not going to want to make us have another sip or another glass, or certainly not want to pair it with food. Okay, so we need acidity. So there's a couple of ways to get acidity in wine, right? Especially when it comes to rosé, but in general as well. You can add acidity. Ooh, I've been to wineries before where there's like bags of tartaric acid and all kinds of other stuff there. And you're like, oh, no, I don't need to taste that. Thank you. Right? It happens. And there are some parts of the world where if there's like a super hot vintage and, you know, right, sugar accumulation and acid dropping, they sort of happen like this. So if it just gets too hot towards harvest and there's not enough acidity, there's nothing wrong with adding a little bit. It happens. Okay. But for a rosé like this, one of the tricks is to harvest those grapes earlier than you would have for red wine, right? So that means that they're harvesting the Syrah here and the Cab earlier on, sometimes a couple of weeks or even more earlier than the parts of the vineyard where those same grape varieties are being grown for red wine, right? And what that does, it means it's going to have less sugar, which means less food for the yeast to consume and convert into alcohol. Who wants a 17% alcohol rosé on a hot day by the pool? That's terrible, right? But also because they're harvesting them earlier, there's more acidity. So it keeps them fresher, right? You have a more structured rosé. There are two ways to make rosé, except for champagne, where it is legal to get that rosé color in rosé champagne by actually adding a little bit of red wine. It's the only region in France where that's legal. Anywhere else, oh, you're in trouble, like serious trouble, okay? But in Champagne, they proved to the wine authorities that historically that was done there and they're allowed to do that. Anywhere else in France, and frankly, most places around the world, rosé, you're either harvesting specific red grapes earlier in order to create a bright, fresh rosé, or you're doing what's called saignée. Anyone here speak French? Ooh, okay. So saignée, to bleed, to have been bled, rather. Saignée, okay? Same root as sanguine, right? So saignée, meaning that they'll harvest all the grapes at the same time for the reds. And then if they intend to allow the juice and the skins to hang out with each other and macerate together for, let's say, 5 days for the red, from that same tank, maybe 8-10 hours into the process, they'll bleed off a certain percentage of that juice. Now, that's rosé. It looks like rosé. Plenty of good rosés are made that way. But because those grapes weren't harvested quite as early, you're going to tend to get a richer and less vibrantly mouthwatering rosé. So two different ways, right? This one, can we talk about pairing here for a second? What would you want to pair this with? What do you want to eat right now? Potato chips. Yes. Yes. Bright mouthwatering rosé and potato chips is fabulous. The only thing better than rosé and potato chips is champagne and potato chips, which will change your life. Champagne and fried food, you're welcome. Go home and do that. When we do fried chicken night, we do it the first Monday of the month if I'm not traveling. We only drink champagne on fried chicken night. I don't do many things very well, but I make good fried chicken. Champagne is great with it. But yeah, I mean, that with the potato chips, right? That acidity is going to cut right through it. It's really vibrant. When we're pairing wine and food, it's so important. It's so important to have acidity, right? You ever have like a big bowl of fettuccine Alfredo? Have you all had fettuccine Alfredo before? Yeah? Do you crave to drink alongside that fettuccine Alfredo a glass of whole milk No, you don't. That's disgusting. It's two textures that are basically exactly the same. You get mud in your mouth. You can go to the hospital from that. You can't, but I don't know, maybe from sadness. So when I have fettuccine Alfredo, I tend to crave Prosecco or a brightly acidic white wine. Cheap Pinot Grigio with fettuccine Alfredo is wonderful. It's the same reason as why we squeeze lemon onto things with butter sauce or cream sauce. We want contrast. So something like this, though we do tend to think of a rosé in this style, most rosés, as pairing with lighter summery dishes, right? Salad. I had rosé the other day with a beautiful tuna hoagie. We're very gourmet at Chateau Freedman, let me tell you this. And it was great. Chateau Freedman is a little twin in suburban Philadelphia with pretensions. But, you know, it also does go well with slightly richer dishes, not too heavy. If you had this alongside a ribeye, save the money and have water because you're not going to taste the wine. It'll be totally overwhelmed. But slightly richer dishes, veal, you know, nicely, you know, simple like a veal piccata, right? With butter and capers and lemon. Wonderful with that, right? So it can handle a little bit more richness. Also, I'm going to say, play around with serving temperature for rosé. Oftentimes in the United States, we tend to drink our reds too warm and our whites and rosés too cold, right? You drink your reds too warm, you're going to amplify the alcohol. The fruit's going to taste cooked or stewed, and you're just going to lose that freshness, right? You ever been to a restaurant and you order a glass of red, and at least for me, I look on in horror when they go back behind the bar, which is like 4 people deep, right? And then they'll pull the bottle there. It's like 90 degrees. All right. And then they pour the glass, and it's like grape juice and vodka in it. It's gross. So a little bit cooler for your reds than you might be used to. Your whites and rosés, generally speaking, look, if you're sitting by the pool, you want your rosé as cold as possible. I got no problem with that. But if you are pairing it with food or really trying to pay attention and parse the details of the rosé, pull it out of the fridge 10, 15 minutes before you pour yourself a glass. I promise you, you will get more nuance in that wine. By the way, there's something called the 20/20 rule that friends of mine, Mike and Jeff, they're amazing wine writers, and they have a great web series called What We're Drinking. They go by the World Wine Guys. Look them up. They're fantastic. And they really know their stuff. And they came up with what they call the 20/20 rule. And that is, in general, put your reds in the fridge for 20 minutes before you drink them. In general, take your whites out of the fridge for 20 minutes before you drink them, right? Rule is, the richer your wine is, the less cool you want it. Notice I didn't say warm. The lighter in texture your wine is, the more cool you want it. But notice I didn't say cold. But the 20/20 rule is a good sort of middle ground there. So what do we think of this rosé? Good way to start? Perk up the palate, wake you up. Yeah, great stuff in Washington State. The Pacific Northwest right now is so exciting from a wine standpoint. Oregon, Washington, it seems like every year they're discovering a new hillside where a new clone of whatever grape variety they want to plant there is going to be super exciting and just excel in the world of wine. So Pacific Northwest, great stuff going on. Our next wine, now we're heading south to Provence. The one thing that's tying all of these wines together today is they are all based or include in their blend what we call Rhone grape varieties. Rhone meaning the Rhone River Valley of southeastern France. The big 3 Rhone grape varieties for reds are Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvedre. Okay, so all 3 of the wines today are going to incorporate some combination in addition to other grape varieties as well. They're all going to be completely different in character, right? So finish this. If you would like, all kidding aside, I'm happy to bring around like cups if anybody wants to dump them in there. I'm generally the only person that does that. It's the one downside of my job. I don't drink that much. It's horrible. I wasted my time at Penn State, all those years of practicing. And I'm going to come around with the Provençal Rosé. Sound good? All right. And for everybody who's watching online virtually, please pour yourself something good. You don't want to watch this without something in your glass. All right. I'll be right back. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Shout them out. I'm happy to help. All right. Where is the French? Yeah, could you pull that? Thanks. Do we have any red? Do we have the French rosé? Huh. Do we have the French, the Byler? Yes. Nah, I'm coming out right now. Thanks. Sure. Thanks. All right. Yeah. So good question just came up. Thank you. What's going to happen with wine production in the Pacific Northwest right now with the drought and now the fires? It's a great question. And this is something that in the American West, whoa, was that in your glass? You have a dead fly in your glass. Wow. I think that's good luck, right? Tell yourself it's good luck. We have a fly that decided to go. All right. So it definitely was not in the bottle. So that's perfect. It just wanted to hang out with. So when it comes to extreme weather, like we've seen time and time again in the American West and Pacific Northwest, it's a problem. And we're not going to know what's going to happen to any individual wine or wine producers' production this year until harvest and until the first fermentations start to happen. Okay. And that's because the impact, well, first of all, the impact of drought and extreme heat, that can actually cause a real problem with irrigation, especially if you're in a part of the world where there's, the wells are running dry, the reservoirs are running dry. So what are you going to do to irrigate? There was a great article in the New York Times this past Sunday about, they're actually in some parts of California, they're actually purifying and filtering wastewater and then using that for irrigation. The problem is they're scared that there might come a time where these municipalities say, we actually need to fully sterilize this and use this for drinking water. So the vines are going to have to die. So that's number one. The other issue is, if vines get too hot and they don't have enough water, they're just going to stop producing fruit and they're just going to protect themselves as much as possible, right? Keep their leaves there, try to continue the processes of photosynthesis in order to live and fight for another year. If you do get grapes that make it through and they're not burnt by fires, then you have to worry about smoke taint, right? Because depending upon which way the wind blows, you could have some issues. Yeah, it could taste like toast or an ashtray or, old cigarettes. So that's an issue in that case. And smoke taint is really going to be a problem with red grapes or red wine more than anything else, because the smoke compounds tend to accumulate in the skins, and the skins they're actually, they hang out with the juice in order to get that red wine. So you really don't know until afterwards, but it's going to be stressful and potentially economically damaging. So thank you. It's not looking good. It's not looking good, but things might be okay. It might be a great harvest, just a smaller than normal harvest, right? I recently signed the contract for my first book, which is on climate change's impact on the wine and spirit world. And for one of my chapters, I'm focusing on 2009 in Bordeaux, where there was like this biblical hailstorm in the middle of the night of May 9th, 3, 4 in the morning. Some vineyards lost 100% of their crops because of the hail. Other ones lost 30%. But some of them who lost like 30 or 40%, the fruit that did survive was like epically wonderful. So it just depends. Resilience, yeah. So it's not good though. It's not looking good. So what do we have here? We have the Byler Pear a Fils. This also from Trinchero, thank you. This one is from Aix-en-Provence. So we're talking about southern France. This one, the blend, this is 41% Grenache, 27% Syrah, and the rest Cab, Cinsault, and some other stuff. So what's interesting here is this is from a part of France where Grenache is going to play a very, very important role. Now, if you've ever had a wine from the Southern Rhone called Châteauneuf-du-Pape, all right, you've had Grenache-dominant red blends. All right, if you've had Southern French rosés, guaranteed you've had Grenache-dominant rosés. So let's give this one a smell and a taste. And here's my question for you. How's this one different from the Charles & Charles from Washington? Good. Smells sweeter. Another, a little more? Yeah. Literally no one has ever said in my 15 years of doing this full time, no, I don't want more wine. The whiskey events, sometimes they say no, thank you. It is more muted. Yeah, it is more muted, right? Is it fair to say that this is just a more subtle, perhaps slightly more floral, more lifted, it's a more aromatic wine as opposed to the Charles & Charles, which was much more about the fruit. Cranberry, strawberry, excuse me, red cherry, that sort of thing, right? So this, to me, is that classic bifurcation of the wine world, right? Where people used to say wine is going to be in the old world style or the new world style. And the new world style meant more fruit forward, and the old world style meant more savory, spicy, non-fruit characteristics forward. I don't agree with that differentiation anymore, right? Because technically the old world was the classic growing regions of Europe, and the new world was everywhere else on planet Earth that was not, right? Well, how do you lump together like Southern Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Washington State, and Argentina? There's a couple thousand miles between all of them, right? So it's not all the same. But generally speaking, this is sort of that Provençal style where it's softer. There's generous but more subtle fruit. And this, because of that characteristic, because it doesn't have, is it fair to say it doesn't have that same concentration that the Charles & Charles has? Right? It's totally different acidity, right? Yeah, totally different acidity. And because of that, this we're going to want to pair with slightly lighter foods. A niçoise salad would be great. I don't know if this would be as good with my tuna hoagie from the other day. I think the peppers and onions would kill it. But this with, just gently grilled vegetables, simple pasta, garlic, olive oil, simple seafoods without too much of an assertive, aggressive sauce. But, these sort of look very similar. They're made from very similar grape varieties, and yet they taste very different. They feel different on the tongue, and they require different foods to pair with them optimally. When I say require, you drink anything with anything, right? Like don't let anybody tell you otherwise, least of all wine snobs like me. Drink what you want and eat what you want. You'll live a happy life, right? But to maximize the pleasure that we're getting from both, maybe a little bit of direction there. But something like this, I think, did anyone smell today? I forget which chef was doing it. He was closest to the entrance of the room where he had that cooked down fennel on the risotto. It was our junior chef, right? And it was the pork loin that was sort of draped on top, and he had the fennel to brighten it up. This would work brilliantly alongside that risotto because the fennel, you're actually going to pick up some fennel notes in this alongside that, but it's still, risotto can be a little bit heavy, right? It can be a little bit dense. This would cut through that and give a counterpoint of greater lightness to it, right? So two very different styles, even though their origins in terms of grape variety are pretty similar. Questions about this one? For our next one, we're going to be doing something that is very different. And I love doing this. I've been doing this all spring and summer. For this one, so our first one, thank you. The first one was from 2019, the Charles & Charles. This one that we just had was from 2020. Thank you, sir. The next one that we're having here from South Africa is 2018. Now, received wisdom says that you do not age rosé ever. You just don't do it. I thoroughly disagree with that. You don't age rosé 10 years. You don't even age it 5 years. But a few years of maturation on a well-structured rosé that had enough acidity in the beginning to withstand that can actually bring out an entirely different range of flavors and aromas in that rosé. So this one is produced by someone in a winery in South Africa called Holden Mans. And we actually imported this one by mistake. My wife and I were on vacation in South Africa, and a friend of ours in the tourism board arranged for us to have to spend the night at this wine farm. It's a beautiful 5-star wine farm, as they call them there. And he arranged for a half-hour tasting. And he said, I think they make some pretty good wine. I don't know, you tell me. So we went into our half-hour tasting, and we came out of our half-hour tasting 3.5 hours later. And then decided to take the next 3 years of our lives getting licensed by the US government in the state of Pennsylvania to import it. We like it that much. So this one is a pretty similar blend to the previous one. It's dominated by Grenache and Syrah, but it has a little bit of extra age on it. So if we smell this, do you notice now we're starting to get things that are a little bit more nutty? Right? Now we're getting things like cantaloupe. There's a little bit of citrus peel and oil as opposed to the citrus flesh and berries. It's a whole different range of flavors and aromas there. It started off more similar to the Provençal one, but the extra age has given it a little more weight on the palate and a greater savory sort of base note there. So give it a taste. Spicier than the other two, right? Much spicier. So now at 3 years old, this 2018 Holden Mans Rosé has gone from the flavors that we typically associate with rosé to the texture that we associate with rosé, but that texture sort of carries flavors that are more familiar in the red expression of these grape varieties. Those spices and savory characteristics have come through. Little cigar tobacco now on the finish. So now if we're pairing this with food, now we can really go crazy, right? This with like a really interesting, like a Chinese 5-spice powder rub on some ribs, right? Play up the spice, play up those savory characteristics. This with some preserved citrus, like in a tagine, right? Chicken I love because a chicken tagine, because texturally, right? It's not going to overwhelm the wine. The wine's not going to overwhelm the protein, but it's going to carry those flavors and aromas really, really well, right? So 3 very different wines, even though they're in that same category. So does anyone have questions, comments, issues? We have like 4 minutes. I've already run late. I'm sorry. I get excited. So questions, yeah. The last one? Yeah, so this is a producer called Holden Mans, Holdenmanz. So the other 2 were provided by Trinchero. This one we import, although I bought this at Frank's Wine, which is right here in Wilmington. But if you're looking for this, certainly feel free to email me. and I'm happy to. Your best bet is just to message me on Instagram. That's where I am most of the time. It's just at Freedman Reports, Freedman, and then I'll point you in the right direction for it. Other questions? All right. Well, thank you all. Sorry for running late, but thanks for hanging in there.